In 2018, a single industrial metal quadrupled in price in under 2 years. It wasn't oil, it wasn't gold, it wasn't lithium. It was an element most people have never heard of, and it quietly sits inside every smartphone, laptop, and every electrical vehicle on the planet. Investors who understood what was happening made fortunes. Manufacturers who didn't hedge got crushed, and entire government supply chain strategies were rewritten overnight. The metal is called cobalt, and right now it sits at the center of one of the most economically important and most misunderstood commodity stories of the 21st century. Here's why it matters to you personally. Cobalt is a hard silver-grey metal, relatively rare, about 0.001% of the Earth's crust. And for most of history, it was a niche industrial material with one famous use: making things blue. Ancient Egyptians, Persian potters, Renaissance painters all used cobalt compounds to produce that distinctive deep blue color in ceramics and glass. They had no idea what the element was. They just knew certain minerals turn things blue when heated. The name cobalt comes from the German word Kobler, meaning goblin. Medieval miners kept striking this useless metal instead of copper or silver that they were after. They blamed underground spirits and thus called it the goblin metal. Then came 1991. Sony commercializes the lithium-ion battery using lithium cobalt oxide in the cathode. That single innovation, which won the 2019 Nobel Prize in Chemistry, transforms cobalt from an obscure pigment material into the backbone of modern electronics. The smartphone era of 2007, the EV revolution in 2010, suddenly the goblin metal is running the world. Today, 60 to 70% of all cobalt mined globally goes into rechargeable batteries. It is in your phone, your laptop, your EV, your wireless earbuds, and almost none of the people buying these products know that it exists. Here's where the story gets geopolitically uncomfortable. The Democratic Republic of Congo produces approximately 70 to 75% of the world's cobalt, nearly 3/4 of global supply from a single country with chronic political instability, weak institutions, and almost no functional infrastructure outside of mining regions. Australia produces around 5 to 7%, Russia a further 4 to 6%. But the world has essentially decided to build its electrified future on top of the one country's geology. While the Congo dominates mining, China controls 60 to 80% of global cobalt refining capacity. This means cobalt mined in Australia or the Congo or Russia typically travels to Chinese refineries before it ever becomes a battery component. China doesn't just participate in the cobalt supply chain. In many respects, China is the cobalt supply chain. So the clean energy transition the West is betting its future on, it runs through the Congo for raw materials and through China for processing. That's not a supply chain. That's two choke points, and almost every government in the developed world is only now waking up to what that means. Forget textbook definitions. Let's walk through what the economic forces actually look like on the ground, in boardrooms, training floors, and in the decisions that determine whether businesses survive or get wiped out. It's 2024. You're running a battery manufacturing plant. Cobalt prices have just spiked from $15 to $28 per pound within months. Because 3 major Congolese mines flooded simultaneously, cutting global supply by 15%. Do you absorb the cost and protect your margins? Or pass it to your automotive clients and risk losing contracts? Here's the brutal part. Your competitor locked in cobalt futures at a lower price 6 months ago. they're now undercutting you on every deal you're trying to close. That's supply and demand, not a graph punched straight in the gut. The Congo sits on roughly 70% of the world's cobalt reserves. It ranks 176 out of 191 countries on the UN Human Development Index. The wealth flows out to refineries in China, shareholders in London, and trading desks in New York. Chinese state-owned companies operate nearly 70% of the industrial mines inside the country. That isn't just an ethical problem. It's structural instability baked into the base of the entire supply chain. And it's one reason the 2025 export ban shouldn't have surprised anyone. The longer-term threat to cobalt isn't a flood or a ban, it's chemistry lab. Lithium ion phosphate batteries, or LFP, use no cobalt at all. By 2023, LFP had overtaken cobalt-based chemistry to claim the largest share of the global EV battery market for the first time. Cobalt intensity in battery demand fell by 2/3 between 2020 and 2024. In 2025, even as the Congo's export restrictions sent cobalt prices surging to over 130%, battery pack prices kept falling because enough of the industry had already moved on. The exit ramp exists, but it's a long ramp. High-performance applications, aerospace, superalloys, premium EV ranges, defense systems still depend on cobalt chemistry, where there's no viable substitutes yet. Old and new technologies coexist for decades, which means the volatility doesn't end, it just changes shape. So step back and look at what we've just walked through. A single metal, less than 7 billion annual raw material market, and yet it sits as a choke point inside industries worth trillions. The asymmetry between cobalt's market size and its strategic weight is the whole story. This is what a bottleneck resource looks like in practice. A relatively small input that is disrupted sends shockwaves through global manufacturing, equity markets, and government balance sheets simultaneously. The United States and the European Union have both classified cobalt as a critical mineral essential to national security. That's not bureaucratic language. That's governments quietly admitting that they build the foundation of their economic future on a supply chain they don't control, and are now racing to fix that before someone else exploits it. China already understood this a decade ago. That's why they own the refining. That's why they've been signing mining agreements across Central Africa for years.